What crazy ass story do you need to tell? When my mum was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him, I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a DRS appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing cause I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was the office next door and he left. A little while later I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said thank you. And that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Years ago I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia when a car with 2 dudes picked me up. We got to chatting and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns and he said hell, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle. So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather, I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing shit up with bags of Dannerite on some random DoD employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name, dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight. Close to the end of the program, I was doing the run-up in a Cessna, when I smelt something. Do you smell that? Smells like gas, I say. Instructor 21 years old, shrugs. Annoyed, I open the door. And there is a spreading puddle of avenue gas under the plane. Shit. The instructor panics, stay in the plane, I'll get help, and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I noped out of there, and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane, and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing, due to fuel issues. 1 fatality. No significant repercussions for company. A little while back my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. She thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy/baby arrangement. Turns out what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Sex wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. Edit. This allowance would have covered her college tuition for the semester. He knew what he wanted and was very motivated. My dad went to secondary school with John Lennon and was a couple of years older than him. Dad was known for playing the drums and being quite musical. And one day John asks him whether he'd like to be the drummer in a band he's forming. Dad was keen, but my granny said he needed to prioritize studying and so he didn't join. The band formed and were called the Quarrymen, and I think a guy called Colin was the drummer instead of Dad, who I believe was later replaced by Pete Best and then Ringo as they changed to the Silver Beatles, and then the Beatles. I like to imagine that in an alternative universe my dad said yes and that was history. I don't even mind that I wouldn't have been born if this had been the outcome. He really deserved to have had that lifetime. Nothing super amazing, but I, 26. Am adopted. I have nothing to do with my biological family save for a half-brother, who I reconnected with last year. We're friends on Facebook. About a year and a half ago I spent 6 months as a pizza delivery driver. While there I met a man, probably in his 50s or so. We got along. He was a driver just for something to do since he's retired now. I quit the job 6 months in, but a couple months ago I came back and the guy is still there. A week ago my brother tags me on Facebook, as well as my co-worker. A few days later I asked my co-worker how he knows my brother. After a misunderstanding, my brother has the same name as his father, so when I asked, he thought I was talking about my brother's father. We found out that the co-worker is actually my uncle by marriage, or was. He was married to my bio-mum's sister for some 20 years, until their divorce a couple of years ago. The guy used to babysit me when I was a baby, and has pictures of my brother and bio-mum that he gave me. He's currently looking for baby pictures of me, because I don't have any from before I was adopted. My mom and dad would be super happy if he can find them. I used to go to a Korean middle school, so physical punishment for any bad behavior was expected. One day a few kids were talking in class, so our ass of a math teacher decided that we somehow all deserved to get punished. He told us to kneel on our desks and started hitting us on the thigh one by one. We all complained but figured we'd just get it done with and get back to class. But one of my classmates completely snapped. He pulled out a knife from his pocket, I deck why he had one, and put it towards the teacher's throat and threatened to kill him. At that moment I was genuinely afraid I was about to witness a murder and was scared. But for some reason every single one of my classmates was laughing at this situation. I still don't understand why, but thankfully there was no murder. The kid just ran off to the front office, because he realized he fucked up and came back begging for forgiveness. Somehow he never really ended up getting punished. The cops weren't called, no trial, no suspension, nothing. He did get forced to transfer to a new school, but he didn't get hit with a single thing that would stay on his record. I was an exchange student in Poland a few years ago. I was freshly 18 and had almost no experience with alcohol. 3. Road week of school. We had a dance and I decided to attend. It was not at all like the school dances we have in the US. First off, it was held at a club, downtown. Little odd, but okay. Second, it had a bar. I was in the senior class in high school, and we were all 18, so we could drink. I was not ready for that at all. Third, I had just started smoking the week before. My high school had a smoking gazebo, and probably 1/3 of my class smoked. I started smoking to make friends, lol. This turned into the perfect storm of me getting absolutely fucking shit-faced. After blacking out shortly, I was suddenly outside smoking, and my friends and I were walking to a nearby 24 hours liquor store. I walked in, visibly inebriated, and bought a mid-sized bottle of vodka. The cashier was hesitant, but when she heard I was American, basically just said, "Fuck it, go ham." Probably another 2 hours and another blackout later the police arrive. They start yelling at my class president for wandering in the road. For some reason drunk me decides I should get involved even though I barely speak Polish and am super fucking wasted. I walk up to the cop, and in the worst Polish I've ever spoken, tried to say leave him alone. But what came out was leave and then a pile of vomit all over his boots. Oh fuck. This is it, I thought. I'm going to get arrested and deported. The cop looked at me and said in English, "You an American?" "Yes, sir," I replied, knowing I was in deep shit. The cop looked me up and down, looked at the bottle of vodka in my hand and said, "You drink shit vodka. Come with me." I was put into the back of the police car, and he started to drive away. My heart sank. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be the best year of my life, it was already over. But he stopped 2 blocks away, at the 24 hours liquor store, brought me inside, and bought me a 100 milliliters bottle of Zubrowka vodka. He said, "This is good, and cheap. Welcome to Poland. Now let me take you back to your friends." As we pulled back up to the club, he leaned back and said, "Watch this." He turned on the lights and siren and 3 or 4 kids ran down the block. He was laughing uncontrollably. He unlocked the door, and as I climbed out he shouted, "Be safe, friend." 20 minuets later I blacked out again, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the kitchen floor of the house I was living in, feeling like absolute shit. My host mother had made coffee and said, "Damn, you had a night, huh?" And that was the craziest night I ever had. I got a pilot's license and flew across the country, smuggling marijuana 4 times and then stopped. Now I work a normal job and I can't tell anyone about the coolest, dumbest thing I've ever done. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall and all the kids are joking and laughing. They open the doors and we all start walking in and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in I looked up and on the walls was all this signs. Sinners must burn, the devil is coming for you, Christ is your only savior. Stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said, "We are going." By this time it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a km from home I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as fuck. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned nature rangers to us ever again. My father used to live in Kazakhstan around 2006. One day he was with his work friend at a bar when this tall, built Russian man comes in. He decides he wants to sit in a bar stool close to my dad, but instead of finding a normal, empty stool he goes to a chair occupied by a small woman and literally throws her off the chair, exclaiming that he wanted that chair. My dad sees this and immediately attempts to intervene by saying, "Hey man, what the fuck are you doing?" The Russian man then proceeds to tell my dad, "I'm going to kick the shit out of you when you leave the bar, etc." My father brushes it off, but then he notices that the Russian man's friends have started to join them. About 4 large men inside and another 4 outside. At this point my dad is nervous and decides to call the head of security for the company he works for. Keep in mind my dad was the managing director. The head of security tells my dad wait at the bar for him to come, and after some tense drinking with the work buddy, 30-some bodyguards start pouring into the bar, making a line from my dad to the exit of the bar. Because of the country they are in, the bodyguards all have pistols on them as well. So the 30-something bodyguards have made a wall of people either side of my father. After that the head of security takes him to his car, but there was an additional 2 black BMWs that were there to escort my dad home. Not the most insane story, but it was insane to hear my dad tell it to me. He also said the urge to flip off the big Russian guys was massive, but he didn't want to risk it. I was traveling in Honduras with a girl I was seeing. We were traveling with her sister and some other people, staying in a hostel during the September 15th celebrations in this little town. There were a whole bunch of festivities going on, so we went out and enjoyed the day. At night, walking back to the hostel, we started to fool around a bit. We were making out in the town plaza. We couldn't go back to the hostel to take it further since our friends were there, but it was really dark outside, and the town plaza had some columns and areas that were relatively private. So we just decide to have sex there. We start banging in between a couple of the columns. So she is leaning back against a column and we are kind of on the ground. After a little while, she starts shaking and I look at her and she has this weird look on her face and is shaking like crazy. I think, whoa, she is having the craziest orgasm I've ever seen. Then I felt a really strange sensation all through my legs. And I think, whoa, I'm having a really crazy orgasm too. I had this sensation I couldn't really place, but it was familiar. Then I place the sensation. Electricity. I realize I'm being electrocuted through my legs. I was wearing a condom. And I look at her and realize she is too. I pull us both to the side. I looked at the column she was leaning against. And there were exposed wires coming out of it. She was kind of crying and freaking out because she thought she was going to die and couldn't move. When I was 19, I would deliver drugs for a friend of mine. One of the guys I delivered weed to worked at the local zoo. One day we decided to smoke up in the somewhat hidden area behind the indoor penguin enclosure. After the sesh we went inside to find the penguins acting very weird. Turns out we were smoking right next to the air intake for said penguin enclosure. And that was the day I accidentally hotboxed some penguins. There was a politician that hit on my brother's girlfriend way back. Tried to cheat on his wife with my brother's girlfriend. He's like 40 and she's like 21. My brother always hated that guy. He was in power like for 20 years. My dad campaigned for the candidate that beat him. Went door to door for like weeks. The candidate never would have won if it wasn't for Dad. Won by like 30 votes. Dad never knew about the incident involving my brother. It felt like sweet revenge.